And then I could end up sitting up there by myself anywhere from 4 hours to 12 hours at a time, which is a very long time. I knew from doing the job for so long what time commercial airplanes were coming through. I could tell if a flight was on time or if it was running late. Helicopters coming through, planes coming through, jets occasionally, military jets. Part of the job was to write anything anomalous in the logbook. So my logbook was filled with lightning strikes, which I was supposed to monitor for days afterwards to make sure there were no fires, any anomalous activity. Now, I thought about writing this in the logbook, but I was concerned that I might lose my job. I moved on to the fourth person, another fire towerman. I asked him. I told him the story that I've just told you, and he said to me, but I was concerned about writing in the logbook because I knew it was strange. So I didn't want questions to be asked about my stability up there or whatever was happening. And it was so traumatic that at one point I yelled out in the middle of the forest, "Make it stop!" And it was rough, Mike. It was rough. I found out exactly what the other people were telling me.
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
Reverend Stu, how are you, man?
I'm pretty good. How are you today, Mike?
I'm okay. It's been a long day. It's been a long week and all kinds of stuff going on everywhere in every aspect of my life. Pretty soon I might be able to share some interesting things with you on the investigator side of things, but can't yet. But what's going on?
We just had an election, and I won't get into the results because I know people are sensitive about that, but we've just determined who our Prime Minister is, which is kind of like our president equivalent here. And yeah, so it was very busy here last weekend.
Ah, nice. Interesting. I got to ask, do you still potentially have a close connection to that, or is things different now?
No, I still do. Yes, because it's the same guy there. So
Okay.
I have a friend who's quite a close friend of our Prime Minister. And as I mentioned on previous episodes, I was cheeky enough to ask that friend if we could have our Prime Minister on the show. I know that was ambitious, but you don't know until you ask, do you?
Exactly. Well, I was kind of wondering, like, if you said things changed, I was like, well, now's our opportunity since he's out of office to get him in here, right? But anyways, neither here nor there, I guess.
Right. Yeah, that's something for the future, I hope.
So a couple of times in recent episodes, you have sort of talked about or alluded to a sighting that you had out in the Australian outback. So I think it's time that we have that conversation, Stuart.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, all right. If other guests have been sharing things, then it's only right that I share an encounter.
All right. So welcome one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is Universal Disclosure Meeting the Moment. My name is Mike, an active UFO field investigator in Southern California, with my friend and co-host,
Reverend Stu in Melbourne, Australia.
And we're going to get right into it. So I kind of want to do this almost in a way like I do all the other ones. So for the most part, I'm going to let you talk, and then I've got some questions here. I might write some down while you're talking, and I'm not going to interrupt you because I want to hear the whole story. But to preface it a little bit, I think we're going to maybe put up some photos to give people an idea of where you were, because it looks like it was both beautiful and just vast land of just Earth's beauty, right? In the middle of nowhere. And also, I think it's an important point to say, if you could also, let's start out with what you were doing first, because you shared a video that we might play a clip of as well. And that talks about how, you're in a tower and you can take a piece of string and a compass and within a couple of meters tell where the freaking fire is. I think that's wild and very impressive.
And the people who will sound the alarm if this weekend's high temperatures bring on the worst are on full alert. Nick Coe climbed the steps of a fire tower on the edge of Bunyip State Park, east of Gembrook, to meet one of them.
It's a long, lonely walk for Pete Southcott, 30 metres straight up the so-called Egg Rock Tower. There are few creature comforts in his 3-metre square cabin, no air conditioning and no company, save for the crackling of a two-way radio. From here, Pete can see about 1/10 of the entire state, like a handful of others in their own towers barely visible from here, with whom he constantly compares notes.
951 group call from Port Phillippi's Towers. The block is currently clear. Out to you, Mount Benning Tower. Roger, thank you, Mark. Out to you, Mount St Leonard Tower.
Ingenious planning means a piece of string can give Pete a fire's bearing within a couple of metres over his entire watch area. From then, it's his call to identify what and who is in immediate danger.
It's a feel. It grows on you. Yes, it's very nervous the first couple of seasons.
10 years ago, Pete watched the nearby Dandenong Ranges seemingly explode at his feet. Lives and property were lost. A baptism of fire from which he's learnt to never turn his back on the bush and to trust his feelings as much as he does the ability of the weather forecasters.
Yeah, you can feel it when you wake up in the morning, no doubt.
The job of finding and predicting where fires will go is as old as civilization itself. Technology has improved things remarkably, but for fire spotters like Pete, it still relies largely on gut instinct.
Yeah, it's very much the same. I think it's a bit of a cultural heritage, really, in this occupation. Yeah, we're doing the same thing they did hundreds of years ago.
Nick Coe, National 9 News.
I absolutely love that job, Mike. It's around about 20 to 25 years ago. I was trained as a forest firefighter, and my role was to sit in a fire tower, observe what was happening in the environment, and it's like the first point of notification to let the crew know there's a fire that needs to be resolved. So it was a very responsible job, and I felt very proud about doing it.
Excellent, excellent. And then, well, whatever I was going to say, I'm sure we'll get to that at some point. So then, so at one point you were out there and doing your fire watch essentially. And what was that like? How long were you out there all by your lonesome?
It would vary depending on the severity and the fire danger for the day. So there was a fire duty officer who was in charge of notifying us the night before of our start time, and we wouldn't get the finish time until we were working. So the night before I'd be told a start time, and then I could end up sitting up there by myself anywhere from 4 hours to 12 hours at a time, which is a very long time.
Oh my God. Okay. So how do you plan for that kind of thing? Like you go into work and you don't know how long your shift is going to be. How does that work?
I was basically on call for months for the whole fire season, and there are a lot of restrictions. I couldn't drink, because I needed to be 100% sober if I was on call. Couldn't indulge in anything that was distracting, because there was an actual legal obligation. If something went down and there was an investigation, then the crew could get in serious trouble. So we took that very seriously.
Well, that makes sense. So then at some point, I don't have the note in front of me, but when approximately, because this is a while back, but do you remember the year or between, X and Y years?
Yeah, I think it was from memory around about 2005, 2006. And I'll give you a little background. So I moved to a beautiful town, an idyllic country town called Warburton, which is about 60 miles outside of the centre of Melbourne. I moved there. It's in the forest. At the time, there was only a population of around about 4,000 people. So you can imagine, we might show a photo of the town. It's absolutely beautiful. It's set in the mountains. And up that way is one of our major water catchments, where the water is stored in a dam at the Upper Yarra Reservoir. And I got a job on the fire crew there. And what our role was to protect that fire catchment during each fire season. I did that for almost a decade. I just loved the job. It was a big responsibility. I had to learn the things you were talking about before, about triangulating the locations of fires. We were very accurate. I could, between 2 or 3 of us towers, we could locate a fire maybe up to 20 kilometers away. I'm not sure what that is in miles, within 100 meters. So we're very accurate. Then a plane or a helicopter would be sent to confirm the location. There were rappel crews which would descend from a helicopter and fight the fire. And then once the fire was underway, it was our responsibility to tell the ground crew what was happening, so they'd know if they were in danger. It was a very responsible job, Mike.
It definitely sounds like it. Yeah. and quite technical and sort of all encompassing, I think, with the senses, because you're looking in a 3-dimensional space for a fire potentially off in the distance, and then trying to figure out how far. So this is going to be really great for what we're about to talk about, actually, because anyway, we'll get there. So so what happened? You were out and about at one particular point, and you saw, what did you see?
Okay, so I was very vigilant and I took this job very seriously. So I was always monitoring the skies, which is very interesting from a UFO point of view. My eyes were definitely to the skies at all times here, Mike. I knew from doing the job for so long what time commercial airplanes were coming through. I could tell if a flight was on time or if it was running late. Helicopters coming through, planes coming through, jets occasionally, military jets. Anyway, so one particular day, I was monitoring the skies and I saw something just hovering in the air and it was completely silent. I looked at it and it kind of looked like an upside down submarine or a zeppelin. It was completely black, completely silent. I thought, how did I miss that? I turned around to grab my military grade binoculars and went to have a look, and it was gone. And I thought, how can that thing have left the airspace that quickly? This is how quickly I turned around to grab the binoculars and looked back, and it was gone. I thought, that's strange. The part of the job was to write anything anomalous in the logbook. So my logbook was filled with lightning strikes, which I was supposed to monitor for days afterwards to make sure there were no fires, any anomalous activity. Now, I thought about writing this in the logbook, but I was concerned that I might lose my job because I couldn't explain what I'd just seen. At the time, I wasn't particularly thinking UFO or anything. I just thought that's very anomalous, and I'm certain about what I just saw.
Wow. So I mean, how it sounded like it was like a really quick thing. Like you were, if you can kind of go back to that, before you turned around and got the binoculars, I think it was, like what, how did it capture your attention? And then like, how long do you think you saw it before you tried to get the binoculars?
Okay, so if something regular was entering the airspace, I'd hear it first. So I'd know it was coming and I'd grab the binoculars and have a look. In this instance, I was scanning the skies and all of a sudden this thing was just there. And I watched it for maybe 5 to 10 seconds while I pondered, first of all, what is that? Where in the heck is the rotor? Because I was thinking in terms of helicopter, if it's just in a stationary position in the air. Why can't I hear it? Why can't I see a rotor? What is going on? So it was probably about 5 to 10 seconds before I turned around to get the binoculars. And then even before I put the binoculars up to my face, I saw it was gone. I couldn't understand what had happened, what I'd just seen.
So when in the process of putting the binoculars up to your face, did you see where it went to?
No, because I looked away for very briefly, maybe at the absolute most 2 seconds to grab the binoculars. And so what you do when you grab the binoculars, you first have to look without them to get the general location you're looking at and then view through the binoculars. So I didn't even get a chance to look through them because the thing had gone.
Okay. So then any idea, like a guess, like how far away this thing would have been or how high up in the sky it may have been?
Okay, they're good questions. Now, I knew the approximate bearing it was on, and by bearing, that means compass direction from my location, which interestingly was on a bearing for a place called the O'Shanassy Lodge. Okay, here's a whole extra layer of this, Mike. So the O'Shanassy Lodge is a place that was, at the time I was there, was being utilized and run by the Church of Scientology for a drug rehab center called Narconon. That was hovering above that location. I had the bearing. Now, I got to be careful here because I only had one bearing, so I could see the direction, and it appeared to be in the location it was certainly on that line of that facility. In terms of how high it was, that's a difficult one. that's a little hard to tell too. I would have worked on that if I'd still been able to see it, but it was in the sky, not particularly high. In a kind of location it would be in if it was hovering over a particular location, trying to look at something, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I mean, I know it's always difficult when you're talking about a three-dimensional space and we don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. But in terms of, like, say, the tree line, did you have any estimates as to how high above the tree line it might have been?
Yeah, okay, that's a good perspective. Yeah, maybe 5 times higher than a tree. So I'm already at a particular elevation where I was in that fire tower. I think from memory it was about 600 to 700 meters. Sorry, I'm talking in terms of meters for American audience, but that's we talk in that system here. And I was certainly having to look up from my vantage point. So and I know that this facility is more or less on the ground there. So yeah, it's hard for me to estimate, Mike, but I can see it in my mind's eye still. But it wasn't at the kind of height where a plane would be passing. It was more at the type of height and elevation that a helicopter would be passing if it was looking for something on the ground from their own eyes without any binoculars, if that makes sense. So if you were passing over a location in a helicopter and you were trying to look down to see where a fire was, it was about that elevation or maybe slightly higher.
Okay, I mean, it makes sense. I can sort of visualize it as well. But I also know that it can be sometimes difficult, especially without photos or video. Yeah, I mean, it only happened for 5 seconds, right? So, I mean, did you do you have a I don't know, do you have a photo of the area that we could show, and I could maybe potentially superimpose what you're describing to get an idea, and then we can determine, put it down a little or put it up a little or something like that. We can give a really nice visual.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I should be able to get that, and I should be able to indicate on the photo the approximate height, which would be great. That's good thinking.
Okay, awesome. Perfect. Yeah. So then, I mean, probably not, but I don't know. Did you have any pets with you?
No, I don't know whether it was disallowed to have pets, but I didn't. So
Okay.
this location was on Crown land, so it's land owned by the state that I'm living in. Australia is part of the Commonwealth, the British Commonwealth, so we refer to those lands as Crown land. And there's another interesting layer to this story, which is this location was visited by the Queen of England back in the 50s. I'm not entirely sure where she was, but it seems like a strange place for her to visit because it's so far out of Melbourne.
I wonder if that had to do with just the Queen's owning the land, I guess, as it were, or if it was maybe significant in some manner.
I don't know. There's quite a lot of Crown land here, so it's particularly where I was, it's only certain people have access to these areas because it forms part of our water catchment. So we're trying to keep that area untainted and pure, so we can have high quality water here, which we do.
Okay. And I'm now realizing too that pet question was maybe a little bit silly because you said you were at 700 meters up.
Yeah, somewhere between 600 and 700 meters up, and that's just the elevation of the mountain I was on.
Okay. Okay. So the tower itself, because you had to do a lot of stairs. I'm thinking like a dog or cats are not going to walk up. You're going to have to carry the darn thing, and you only have a very small little box. Probably freak the animal out anyway. But because there's 3 feet in a meter, so 700 meters would be about like 2,100 feet. But how tall was the tower? I'm curious.
Okay, this particular one I was in, now some of them are very highly elevated and there's extensive stairs to climb and harnesses and everything, but this particular fire tower was more or less resting on the ground. It was still referred to as a tower. It was basically a cabin on the side of the mountain from which I could see a large portion of the forest. Now, I didn't have my own pets, but there were certainly many animals in the area. And I'm talking about things like goannas, which is a particularly large lizard, kangaroos. I saw occasional koala, very beautiful.
Oh, nice. Okay, so yeah, that's a great point because you were out in nature. So, do you recall observing any like animal noises or animal silences during this thing being in the sky?
It was generally quiet. and at this time it was fairly quiet as well.
Okay, but not out of the ordinary quiet though.
I understand what you're asking me there. Not particularly, but I was very focused because at the time, because my role was to look for anomalous activity. Because I would also, part of the role was to check if anyone was intruding into the space too. So we had rangers, we had people on the ground, security people, personnel who I could report to. Hey, someone's in here that potentially shouldn't be. Could you go and investigate that? So when I saw this thing, I was very focused, trying to identify what I was seeing.
Okay. So just kind of curious, like, how did you feel when you saw the object?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I couldn't understand what I was looking at, so I was bewildered really. I needed to understand what I was seeing because that's why I was there. And I just it was very fleeting, and the curious thing was what was revealed to me after my sighting. So that made me realize that what I had seen was quite anomalous.
All right, what do you mean by that?
Okay, what happened was I sat on this thing for a while. And by sat on, I mean I didn't mention it to anyone because I was genuinely concerned that I might lose my job. And this is what I'm talking about. So if you spent up there for 12 hours and you suddenly start saying, yeah, Mike, I'm seeing some strange things in the sky, most likely management are going to say, okay, that's great, Stuart, but I think we think we should take a little bit of a break now, which I didn't want to have happen because it didn't feel, I felt fine, I wasn't in a stress state or anything. In fact, it was very zen being up there sitting in the middle of the forest. It was absolutely beautiful and actually helped me on my spiritual journey, which is a tangential subject, but I didn't write anything in the logbook. That's why I'm not certain exactly of when it happened, but months later, the forest ranger came up to visit me and he periodically used to come up and visit me, which I really appreciated. He'd check in with me and just make sure I was okay. He came for one of these visits, and right near the end of the visit, I said, "Hey, listen, I saw something strange up here," and I pointed towards the location. I said, "Now something was hovering in the sky there," and then all of a sudden, and then the ranger started completing my sentences. Yeah, it's there for a while, and then it disappears. I said, "What? What? You saw it too?" And his reply
Really?
was, yeah, his reply was, well, not that time, but I've seen it before, and so did the man who did the job before you. Now I thought, oh, wow,
Wow.
okay, I'm hearing this from the park ranger. I sat on that for a while too. There's lots of time to think up there and just sit on things. After a while, I got up the courage to contact the other fire towermen in the area, and I worked with one, two, three, four, about five different towers because, as you said earlier, we'd triangulate a location with other fire towermen. So I called one of the fire towermen. I said, listen, I've got something strange to tell you. I felt more confident to speak to the other fire towermen because I just had this thing confirmed by the ranger telling me that he'd seen this phenomena and so had the previous gentleman doing the job. So I got up the courage to talk to the other fire towerman. The first fire towerman, I explained the situation and he said to me, well, I haven't seen that, but what I have seen is lights moving through the forest here in locations that I know there are no roads. I said, what sort of height were these lights? And he said, around about tree height. They move through the forest and I don't know what they are. And I thanked him for his account and his candor. And then I felt even more emboldened. Okay, lowering another fire towerman. The next one, told him the story. I said, the Rangers confirmed it. Now I've heard from this other fire towerman. I don't want to mention these people's names because some of them still work there. The next fire towerman was quiet for a while. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, I've seen a craft, that's the word he used, on the ground. But if you ever mention this to anyone, I'm going to deny that I said it. I was so shocked, Mike. Now I would ask more questions like you would. What do you mean craft? What did you see? I was so shocked. I said, thank you very much. And then I had to ponder that one for a very long time. After I
Wow.
integrated that information, I thought, let's keep going. I called another fire towerman. The next one just told me, no, No, that's weird. When I recounted my story, he said, that's strange. No, I've never seen anything. No, I left that. And I did wonder after speaking to that gentleman whether he didn't, maybe perhaps had seen something but didn't want to say anything. I let that go. I moved on to the fourth person, another fire towerman. I asked him. I told him the story that I've just told you, and he said to me, "Yes, I've seen something." And what I saw, it looked like an orb in the sky, and then it was descending down. And as it descended, it split into two orbs, and it fell gently, the way leaves fall off a tree in autumn or fall. And then they descended below the tree line, and I couldn't see them anymore. Then he told me, speak to this particular gentleman in our organization who's fairly high up and ask him. He's seen the same phenomena I've seen. And I thanked that fire towerman. And then I sat in my fire tower and I thought, I'm not going to ask him. That gentleman is the Queen's signatory on all works undertaken on Crown land in this area. He's an official person. No way. Even after everything I'd heard, I thought, no, I'm not. Because if I say, hey, I saw this strange stuff, I was worried about my job again. So a couple of years passed after that, and I just sat on this. And eventually that gentleman who was the signatory on works undertaken on the Crown land here came to my fire tower as an official check-in. So he asked me how things were going. Is your visibility still the same? There were certain markers through the forest where I'd look at through the telescope to calibrate the system there that we use to identify locations. I told him there that marker over there is obscured by trees. He said, okay, I'll send a crew down there to chop that back so you can see that better. What have you been seeing? And I steered away from the comment.
Well, funny you should know.
But then he was leaving. And in my mind, I'll never forget, I thought, if I'm ever going to talk to him, it's right now because it's just him and me. I thought, don't mention what you've seen, just ask him the question. As he was leaving, I said, one of the other fire towermen, I mentioned these people's names, I'm not keeping them out, mentioned that I should ask you about this thing you saw. This official sat straight back down in the seat and just started telling me the story. And this is what I heard him say. We had spotlighters in the water catchment. Now, what spotlighters are, I don't know if you have this in America, but they go night shooting with a spotlight. They go shooting. We had a spotlight.
Don't think
do you have something
do,
equivalent?
But I have an idea what you're talking about, but I hope that we don't have any here, but not to my knowledge.
Okay, so what it is people go shooting to shoot animals with a spotlight in the darkness in the night. So these people were coming into this restricted area to do this shooting at night. So what this gentleman told me was, I sat up here in this fire tower and I had a ground crew trying to catch these people. And what I was doing was I was telling them they're on this road. Now they've changed. Now they're on that road. Now they're here. So in a way to coordinate and try and catch these spotlighters. He said, as I was doing that, these orbs came down from the sky, moved around the water in somewhat of a circular motion and disappeared underneath the water here. Now, keep in mind, I was at maybe we can put a picture up. I was at a vast dam and water reservoir. So after he told me this story, once again, I didn't go straight into questioning Mike because each time I was so shocked by what I was hearing. The shocking part was to hear this from someone who's an official and also to hear what they're saying. The fact that the other fire towerman, I felt more faith in what this other fire towerman had told me because I was hearing not a corroboration of the story, but a similar account from someone else. Even at that point, I didn't have the courage to tell him, well, actually, I saw this. I thanked him. Wow, thank you for sharing that with me. And he left. So that's what happened. That's my story there, Mike.
I think that was a good way to go about it. Just asking him about his stuff and not, volunteering your own, especially because you were, still wanted to be there, right? But how Do you know how deep the lake or the dam is or was or?
No, I'd have to look at that. It varies depending on how much water is stored in, like all dams, so
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
it's the water is caught in this water catchment, which is vast. It goes for miles, and the dam fills up, and they let some water down for us to drink. And there's water treatment, of course. And during the time I was there, I would see at times that the dam was very high. Other times it was concerningly low. So it really gave me an appreciation of our water supply. It was fantastic.
Interesting. I'm wondering if there are any military bases around there or any sacred sites in the area.
I'm not sure, but when I got the courage to talk about this to more people in the town, I was surprised by how many other people came forward. And one of the people told me the indigenous people see that particular area you're referring to as a sacred site. So I thought that was very interesting in terms of why the lodge was built there in that location, perhaps why the Queen had visited, why more than one of us had seen something strange over that location. Now, the ranger, when he came up and spoke to me, he was talking about the exact same thing. So this sort of black, very dark, very black looking, Zeppelin looking, submarine looking thing. And it sounded by what he was telling me that the previous person who had done the role I had seen the same thing too. Whereas the other fire towerman had seen different things. Well, one had seen the same thing that this executive type person had seen as well. So there were phenomena in the area of varying descriptions, if that makes sense, Mike.
It does, yeah. And yeah, I don't know what I want to say about that. It's interesting that there's multiple different, let's call them shapes, right? Or things observed in the same area, because I think there's something to that. I mean, it sounds definitely like you were that area is a hot spot, as it were, is what we would call it.
I would say so. Yeah, people in the town told me quite a lot of different things about driving at night and seeing lights in the sky. I didn't correlate the information, but it's one of those things, Mike, where when you open up about it, people people tell you their story. So that's the dynamic I experienced with the other fire towermen. That's the dynamic I experienced with people in the town. I don't get the impression. I wasn't going through the town asking everyone, hey, have you seen anything strange? It's just sometimes it would come up and then I'd be told something and then I'd be told, hey, you should speak to my friend because they've also seen something. So it was kind of organic the way that unfolded. And I wasn't avoiding your question about the military base there. I don't know the answer to that. If there is, I guess it would be secret. I didn't hear anything about a military base, but that's an interesting question too, Mike.
Oh, sorry, I mean, it's just pure speculation. Maybe there's an underground base or something, right? You never know. But okay, so yeah, I totally get it. Where this is a catch-22, like, because I can sort of say the same thing. Like, if you say something to someone, that's when they'll open up about it. But it doesn't always work like that either. So you got to kind of feel out the situation or know the person or whatever. Like, are you comfortable enough taking that chance with them, right? Because it doesn't always work that way.
Well, see, in terms of me speaking to the ranger, at that point, I wasn't, and I wasn't thinking this way, Mike. I wasn't thinking, hey, have you seen a UFO? Did you see this? I was just trying to work out what I'd seen as part of my role. But I was concerned about writing in the logbook because I knew it was strange. So I didn't want questions to be asked about my stability up there or whatever was happening. But he just opened up and said, yeah, yeah, I've seen. He started completing my sentences. So I knew he'd seen the same thing. He said, yeah, it does this, and then all of a sudden it's gone. I thought, oh, okay. So I felt more confident in my cognitive abilities, if that makes sense. So I felt more confident. Okay, so I'm not just imagining things. I didn't think I was imagining things, but when you see something anomalous, you're just trying to resolve what did I see. So I'm trying to say to you, I wasn't up there looking for UFOs. I wasn't thinking I was seeing UFOs, but I just saw something anomalous which I couldn't understand. And the interesting thing for me too, Mike, is my sighting is not particularly interesting in a way. If that's all that had happened, I'd seen something in the sky and then it disappeared, I don't think I'd even be talking about it. But the corroboration and hearing about other people's accounts, what made me think, okay, that was definitely something strange.
Yeah, I can appreciate what you're saying. For sure. I'm kind of curious. Just what were you thinking about the minutes or hours leading up to before you saw this thing?
Okay, so that's an interesting layer too. So I might as well talk about this spiritual side of things. So when I
Well,
started,
you know where I was going to take it there. I mean, this is the challenge.
yeah, that's fair.
um,
When I got this job, I was applying for the fire crew, and they would take on quite a number of people because we've got a lot of locations up in the mountains there. I went for the job was advertised for fire crew and fire tower observers. I went into the interview with three gentlemen who interviewed me, and this is a blue collar job. Keep in mind. So I I attended the interview and I stated I'd really like to do one of those fire tower jobs, and all three people who were interviewing me started laughing. I said, "What's so funny?" They said, "Well, normally we have to take on an entire fire crew and talk someone into going up to the fire tower. You're coming into the interview saying, 'I want the fire tower job.'" I said, "Yeah." And then they asked me a lot of questions which are psychologically based. You sure you'll be okay up there in the middle of the forest by yourself? If you take on this role, you need to see out the season because we can't find another person to take over if you decide to quit. So there's more than one aspect to this. You get trained as a firefighter. I got the same training as anyone who was on the ground. They told me if you leave the job, we're going to have to take someone off the fire crew and put them up in the fire tower, which we can't afford to happen. If we offer you this job, do you guarantee you'll stay up there for the entire fire season? And I said, yes, I agree. I got the job. I spoke to some of the other people who were going to be doing the fire tower job, and they told me, Stuart, the first season you do in the fire tower is very rough. I said, very rough? What do you mean rough? I'm sitting up there just looking out the window. How can that be rough? They're like, you'll find out. And sure enough, I did. After I'd been sitting up there for 4 to 12 hours, there was no cell phone communication. There was a telephone, which sometimes would go out of order if we had lightning strikes. I could hear the radio. Because I'm a musician, as you know, I would take my acoustic guitar up there and I'd play acoustic guitar for maybe 3 or 4 hours, but there's only so much of that you can do. What I found after a few months was all the issues that I hadn't worked on came to my attention in my conscious mind. So it was like my subconscious was saying, you're finally not distracted. How about we work on this? How about we work on that? And the kind of things that were coming forward, like, how about how you mistreated this person? How about how this thing that happened in your childhood? What if let's review this? Let's work on that. And it was so traumatic that one point I yelled out in the middle of the forest, make it stop. It was so hard to deal with because all these aspects, all these issues I hadn't worked on in my psyche were coming forward to be worked on. And it was rough, Mike. It was rough. I found out exactly what the other people were telling me. Even though I see myself as a spiritual person, I wanted to leave. I wanted to quit the job. That's how bad it was. And then I remembered what I was told in the interview. Stuart, if you take on this job, will you guarantee you'll stay up there for the whole season? I thought, I can't quit. I've made an agreement. So what happened was I had to deal with a lot of these issues in my mind and just re-examine. It was traumatic. Even talking about it now is a bit rough. Some people that I'd hurt, just by, and I'm not talking about anything criminal here, Mike. Just not being the person I should be. I ended up calling them and apologizing. I'm sorry for this. I want to make amends, and I'm getting emotional just talking about it now. But it was a beautiful thing, and I worked on a lot of my issues because of that. Now, years later, I was talking to my aunt about what happened, and she flatly said, "Oh yeah, they warned you about that in meditation." I said, "What do they warn you about?" And she said, "Well, if you're sitting there in the silence for long enough, all the issues you haven't dealt with will come up in your mind to be worked on because you're not distracting yourself with drinking." I told you about we weren't allowed to have any alcohol. You're not distracting yourself by watching television nonstop, all kinds of other activities. So your subconscious finally says, you're finally listening. How about we deal with all these issues? I told her that is exactly what I told me, but no one warned. Oh, yes, they did warn me. That's what they were talking about when the other fire towerman said the first season is rough. They said specifically the first season is rough because they had obviously been through this as well. So that was the spiritual layer for me. So this is interesting too, Mike. So the season I saw this on, just think about it. So I was probably about 5 years into the job at this point. So I was going through this traumatic thing, which apparently everybody does in the first year. So it wasn't the exact same year. So there's no correlation between Stuart was dealing with all these sort of mental health issues, or, you know, I wasn't going crazy or anything, but I was dealing with my shadow side. See, it was years down the track when I'd already dealt through that, and I felt very calm. I still have that calmness now. You know me, you've known me for years now, and part of the reason I feel like a balanced, calm person is because I went through that. So I'd already been through that. So there was no layer of that. But see, there can be questions asked about people up in the fire tower for that reason, and the management are aware of that. Does that make sense, what I'm getting at there?
Yeah, it does. And I really wanted to talk about this too, because at one point in the past, we were just scratching the surface, and you mentioned, I don't want to tell you what to say, but you mentioned somebody, I don't know, if they shadowed you for a day or something, and for one single day, and then they were like, no, I don't ever want to do this again.
Okay, I'll explain about that. All the fire towermen knew about that. If we occasionally needed a day off, it was up to me or the fire towerman to ask someone on the crew, hey, Mike, listen, I need a day off. You're on the fire crew. You're already trained as a firefighter. How would you feel about coming up to the fire tower and covering for me for a day? Now, every single time the person was enthusiastic. Oh, that sounds great. All I've got to do is sit there, look out the window all day. That's fantastic. Every single time without fail, every single time the person would say, don't you ever ask me to do that again. Now that was one day. Like, it took me months to get to that point where I had my subconscious, asking me questions and everything. But some of these other people couldn't handle one day. So I found that very interesting too.
Yeah, so that's why, I mean, with the topic that we talk about, UFOs and spirituality and the esoteric, non-physical nature of the physical phenomenon, that's what I really wanted to sort of drill down into here as well, because that's a good, for anyone listening out there, could you sit for 12 hours in the middle of nowhere by yourself and handle it? It was just not long ago, I took a weekend away on my own, and something I do, a couple times a year or whatnot. And it didn't take too long for me to get bored, sort of, because I'm always having to do something. But that's also why I do this, is to just disconnect from the outside world, as it were. And I mean, I had a lot of different thoughts come up, but it was all just like, stuff about, nothing. I don't know, like what we're discussing now. But the point is, I thought to myself, like, wow, there's not a lot of people who could probably do what I'm even doing right now, even though it was, in a fabulous place, but I was intentionally disconnected from everything. So that's why I wanted to talk about that. Yeah, I'll go out and do that. And then one day later, a couple hours later, like, oh, I don't ever want to do that again. That I think is a bit, that's, I don't know if you want to call it consciousness or whatnot. I think it sort of applies in a way. And it's definitely ties into this topic, especially when you talk about like abduction or experience or kind of things. When you really start digging into it, there's definitely some connections there, I think.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting layer because you're dealing with these internal aspects. And I know that comes up with other abductee type situations. Chris Bledsoe, for example, was going through a very hard time and sort of contemplating life, the universe and everything, so to speak, when he had his encounter. So I know there are those layers at play. And I always contemplate those issues, Mike, because I've been on the spiritual path for a very long time. So that's not unusual for me. But there was no, you know what? I wish I'd written down the exact date and time that this occurred. And it's because it's because I didn't want to write in the logbook, I should have followed procedure, ironically, and written it in the logbook because I'd be able to tell you the exact date and time that it occurred. But they used to look at the logbook, and if they'd seen anomalous craft in the sky, I would have been asked by management, okay, what's this entry here? And I didn't want questions asked. But now, in retrospect, I wish that I had written that down, or I could have written it down on my own, in some kind of notebook, but I didn't want to talk about it, Mike, and I guess you encounter that a lot as a researcher. People don't want to talk about these things.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, if I'm talking to them, it's because they do. But there is probably more than half the time. It didn't just happen yesterday or last week. I love it when it does because there's so much more I can get at in cross reference. But a lot of the time it's 10 years ago, 20 years, they hold it inside for quite some time. And I think we talked about that in one of our first episodes. And when that happens, it's a really humbling and honoring experience to be the person who's on the other side, because you can just feel it coming out, and you know that it's been inside for a long time. And the kind of stuff I'm talking about is not like they saw a satellite. They saw something quite extraordinary. So it's that comes through. In those cases, quite loud and clear.
That's fantastic. It's beautiful that you do that. Mike, you can help me here. From what I understand, this shape I saw has been seen by other people too. It's like a black cylindrical shape. It looks like, if you can imagine, a submarine turned upside down, or a completely black Zeppelin. That's what it looked like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know really what the most common thing is, right? I mean, that's an interesting point too, because throughout time, and we talked about this, I think, in a couple episodes, but most specifically with Citizen D and the crop circle maker, how over the years, the shapes have evolved. It started out with, Citizen D made a good point that Kenneth Arnold didn't report a saucer. He reported a crescent shape, almost like sort of like a, for lack of a better term, like a sideways Batmobile or a bat symbol, going across the sky, right? But wow. It wasn't a disc. And then when the newspaper reporter said flying saucer, and then it hits the airwaves, then people start seeing saucers. Like, that's kind of interesting, because that wasn't the shape originally that was observed. However, we also talked about in that episode, it was back in the 1897. I'm not Richard Dolan, right? So I don't have all this stuff at the top of my head. But in late 1800s in Texas, Aurora, Texas, maybe, there was a blimp-like object seen. And it crashed. I hope I'm not confusing that with another case. I believe that was the one where there was a little person who was buried, and that's a whole other thing. But if you haven't heard about that, look that up, folks, because that's quite a fascinating case there. But the point is, the shape that you're describing has been around potentially since the beginning, right, of at least modern day, and then there's all kinds. There's the most popular probably is a ball or sphere, just because you can't always tell the shape, especially if it's a light, whether it's daytime or nighttime, you don't necessarily see the shape. But I don't know. I feel like I just went way off. What was the question even that you asked me?
No, that's okay, Mike. I was just referencing the shape. I felt a bit more encouraged later on when I found out that other people had seen this shape. There's something else I want to revisit briefly too. So this location, which I believe it was over, is a location that was visited by the Queen of England soon after she became the Queen, a couple of years after, in the 50s. The reason that's strange is because it's so far out of Melbourne. So it's a good 60 miles outside of Melbourne. She went to this particular location. And then years later, the location, at the time I was there, was being used by the Church of Scientology for their drug rehab facility. Now, I don't know what to make of that, Mike. I don't know if those data points are significant, but I just found it very interesting. And I also wanted to tell you why I finished up on the fire crew. I loved that job, and I loved living in that town. What happened was eventually I was involved in a very significant fire. And from the fires in California how big these fires can be. It's very serious and traumatic. I was in a fire there, and I got nominated for an Emergency Services Medal in my role in the fire, which I'm very proud of. I I did one more fire season, but it really shook me up, and the danger of these big fires. And my house wasn't burnt, luckily, but other house, we lost some people. I thought, as much as I love this job and living in this town, I need to leave. So I thought, I'll be brave. I did one more fire season, and then I moved back to the suburbs. So I now live back in Melbourne.
Okay. Wow. Thanks for sharing that. I feel like some of that was really deep and personal, and I really appreciate you being open to talking about it with me and everybody out there too. I was kind of curious though, aside from this one particular event, as it were, the sighting, have you ever seen anything else that's kind of anomalous or you can't explain?
Oh yeah. Look, I've only just got comfortable enough to talk about this one, Mike. Let me tell you another reason I got this, a bit of a prologue here, why I got comfortable about this. So there is a Facebook page for the location that I used to live in up in that town, which I'm part of. And someone posted an anomalous experience they'd had, and I got tagged on that post by someone who knows me, who said, "Hey, Stuart, you've had something similar. Have you? Why don't you share that with the group?" I thought, "Oh no, oh no." I sat on that for a couple of days, and I thought, why not? So I made up a whole post about it. I thought I'd get ridiculed, but to my absolute amazement and astonishment, a whole bunch of people said, "I've seen something, I've seen that," and people contacted me directly and said, "Let me tell you something that I've seen." Some relatives of the people who I was speaking about, and I never mentioned any names, just like I'm not mentioning here, but I mentioned, for example, the ranger, in the park at that time, or the fire tower over in that fire tower. So they could in a small town of 4,000 people, people can easily work out who you're talking about. So some relatives of those people contacted me and said, "Is this right? Did my dad really said, did my uncle, yeah, is that what was," I said, yeah, this is what they said. "Oh, well, I'm going to go away and confirm that with them." So rather than being ridiculed, people were interested. Now, this is prior to us starting this podcast, Mike. So that's part of the reason that I felt encouraged to do this with you, to talk about what we're talking about today and explore these options, because people are now interested. They're very open to talk about these things. And it's quite exhilarating to hear their stories.
I agree. Yes. Just to throw out, I don't know what you want to call it, but yes, with the sightings, with the seeing of something, it is now acceptable, and people are open to talking about it. With the experiencer aspect of it, that's still different. And that's what I was saying earlier, how you never know. It doesn't always go that way, right? But then again, you're talking about a couple decades ago too. But it's definitely okay to and acceptable to talk about like sightings and things like that. Hopefully soon the other stuff will be also okay and acceptable to talk about more so than it is. It's starting to become, but it's still not quite there yet.
What an amazing time, Mike. I know I say that on quite a few of our shows, but I'm really liking this openness. It's just the right fit for me to be able to talk openly about things. And that being said, like, I realize you just asked me, are there other things I don't want to talk about them? I'm not ready for that yet, but I might get up the courage later. Sometimes when a guest talks about something, I'll chime in briefly about something. But, there's a lot of this is very personal, so I understand why people don't want to talk about it. And not just personal on the layer of, like, I might lose my job. I'm talking about, like, some of the things I explained earlier about the transition I went through of having to deal with some of my shadow work. It's I know everyone's got that, but it's still uncomfortable to talk about. But I honor people who come on our show. I really do, Mike. See, now I'm on the side of being interviewed, and I know I can see what it feels like, and it's a very vulnerable place. But I really respect and honor the people that come onto our show.
Likewise, as do I. And I think that there's potentially a bunch of people out there who don't even realize, the shadowy part of themselves. And they might never, because of the distractions. And maybe that's why people distract themselves so much with TV and all kinds of events or activities. And who doesn't like a good glass of whiskey, right, or a nice cigar? But I think at the end of the day, though, maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But enough said on that. I don't want to sound like a preacher man.
Well, Mike, one interesting thing is that this meditation layer comes up in the C5 protocol, so it's definitely there. That's why I find this subject very interesting from the spiritual angle, Mike, and I'm very glad and grateful to be doing the show with you.
Okay, yeah. So I just want to toss out there too, because I have talked about in other episodes that I have, I guess you could say, sort of started practicing meditation as well. And during that, sometimes, some like you were talking about before, like something like some memory of something from a long time ago that seems completely irrelevant will just float on in. It's like, well, what's that all about? And then I'll think about it for a couple of days. So that's a thing. Yeah, that's a thing.
It's a challenging thing, but I want to say for anyone who's considering doing meditation, just be aware of that going in. It's a beautiful thing once you break through. You can resolve a lot of issues from the past. And it's very freeing. So I'd encourage you to continue on that path, Mike, you and the audience.
Yeah. You never know what you're gonna get when you do it. Although I gotta say, there's been some pretty cool things that happen too. I'm not gonna get into that. It's personal nature, but it's a very powerful thing. And I'll just leave it at that.
All right. That feels like a great place to finish, Mike. I want to thank you so much for today.
Likewise. And, I'm kind of feeling like we're at another natural bookend here in our conversation, where maybe we'll take a little couple weeks off and see what the news happens, if there's anything that we want to address there, or who reaches out to us, because there's a couple episodes now that are sort of out there and they're getting momentum, and we're putting calls out to people to reach out. I've also contacted a couple people who I'd like to talk to that they haven't responded back. Hopefully they do. But I don't want to ever be in a spot where we're sort of putting something out just to be on a schedule. I only want to put out, quality conversations like we have always up until this point. So what do you think? I'm kind of feeling like we'll be back some point soon. We're not sure when. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that feels good, Mike. And I've noticed that it just happens naturally. We get someone reaching out to us or something clicks. And I've got a few things I'm working on in the background too. And I'm talking about potential guests. So I like that. I like that organic flow that we're in.
Excellent. So it hasn't failed us so far. I mean, for those sort of diehard fans, we love you, especially the ones who have listened to every single episode. We generally speaking know who, or at least where you are and whatnot. And those folks are gonna have the same experience that we have this whole time, because every conversation is a standalone conversation, but you put them all together and in chronological order, something pretty interesting and wonderful, I think, happens on a personal level. And that's really what this is. But it's been said before that disclosure isn't an event, it's a process. And it's a process individually for you to come to. So we are just one tiny cog in the larger wheel, pushing it forward and helping everybody and helping ourselves in the meantime. So yeah.
Love it. I love that whole layer of the exploration.
So as always, thanks for your comments, your likes, subscribes, and your shares. We do appreciate all that. Audio only. We see you hearing us. Thank you as well. Everybody all over the world, we will be back at some point soon. And until then, take care.
Much love.